Let's begin with a question that has haunted philosophers, scientists, and theologians for millennia. Do we truly have free will? Or is every thought we think, every choice we make, and every path we walk already determined by forces beyond our control? To explore this question, we'll weave through the philosophical tapestry of determinism, the personal urgency of existentialism, and the startling findings of modern neuroscience. These are not merely academic theories. They touch every part of our lives, our sense of identity, morality, responsibility, and meaning. And if we dare to follow the logic to its end, we might find that the very idea of a self making free choices is far more fragile than we ever imagined. So let us begin. Free will, the belief that we can choose between different possible actions, that we are agents capable of influencing the world, is one of the most intuitive ideas we hold. It feels obvious. You decide to take a walk, to quit your job, to say I love you, or to lie. You weigh options, deliberate, hesitate, and finally choose. In daily life, it seems absurd to doubt this power of choice. But what if that feeling is just an illusion? Let's consider determinism. At its core, determinism is the idea that every event, including every human decision and action, is the result of prior causes. This idea has roots in classical physics, where the universe is often seen as a giant machine, a clockwork governed by unbreakable laws. In this worldview, if we knew the position and velocity of every particle in the universe, we could predict the future with absolute certainty. This is known as Laplace's demon, a thought experiment by Pierre-Simon Laplace. He imagined an intellect vast enough to know all the forces and positions of all items in the universe. For such a being, the past and future would be as clear as the present. Nothing would be uncertain, no outcome would be free. If we accept this strict form of determinism, then free will is impossible. Our choices are simply the result of a long chain of prior events, stretching back to the Big Bang. Your decision to watch this video was determined by neural pathways, environmental inputs, and genetic predispositions, none of which you chose. But doesn't quantum mechanics break this determinism? After all, quantum theory introduces randomness into the physical world. Doesn't that restore our freedom? Unfortunately, randomness is not the same as freedom. If your actions are not caused but random, then they are no more under your control. A dice roll isn't free, it's just unpredictable. So if our choices are random quantum events, they are still not the result of our conscious will. In fact, adding randomness undermines responsibility just as much as determinism does. Now let's take a step back. Even if the universe is determined, perhaps there's still a kind of freedom we can preserve. This leads us to compatibilism, the belief that free will and determinism can coexist. Philosophers like David Hume and Daniel Dennett argue that freedom is not about uncaused choice, but about acting according to one's desires, intentions, and values, without external coercion. In this view, you are free not because you are uncaused, but because your actions flow from your internal states. If you act because of your own motivations, even if those motivations were determined, that's enough for moral responsibility. You can still be praised, blamed, punished, or rewarded. Compatibilism reframes freedom, not as metaphysical independence, but as psychological integrity. But not everyone is convinced. Hard determinists argue that this is a semantic trick. If your desires themselves are caused by prior events, how are you responsible for them? If you grew up in a violent household, or inherited a neurological condition, or were indoctrinated since birth, how much of you is really free? Now let's bring in existentialism. Existentialist thinkers, especially Jean-Paul Sartre, reject the idea that we are defined by anything external to our choices. Sartre famously said, "Existence precedes essence." That is, we are not born with a predetermined nature. We create ourselves through our actions. Even in a world devoid of God, objective meaning, or metaphysical freedom, Sartre insists we are radically free. But this freedom comes with a terrifying weight. If there is no fixed human nature, then we are responsible for inventing our values, our identity, our purpose. Every choice becomes a declaration of who we are. Sartre calls this anguish, the anxiety of absolute responsibility. Even refusing to choose is a choice. Even denying freedom is an act of freedom. But here's the paradox. Existentialism demands radical freedom in a universe that may be fundamentally determined. Can these ideas be reconciled? Sartre himself was aware of this tension. He acknowledged that our past, our environment, our facticity, the brute facts of our situation, constrain us. Yet he believed that within these constraints, we always retain the ability to define ourselves. Modern neuroscience challenges this idea even further. Let's consider the famous experiments by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s. In these studies, participants were asked to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. Libet measured their brain activity and discovered something astonishing. The readiness potential, a signal in the brain indicating the beginning of an action, occurred several hundred milliseconds before the participants reported the conscious decision to move. In other words, the brain had already started the process of action before the person became aware of choosing. If this is true, then our conscious will is not the originator of actions. It is an observer, a narrator, a bystander to decisions already made. More recent studies, with improved methods, have replicated and expanded these findings. Some brain scans can predict a person's decision several seconds before they are aware of it. This has led many neuroscientists to conclude that free will is an illusion, that our brains make decisions unconsciously, and our conscious mind constructs a story afterward to explain it, like a press secretary inventing reasons for a policy already enacted. But is that the final word? Some researchers argue that Libet's experiments only apply to trivial, meaningless decisions, like flexing a wrist. They point out that larger, more complex decisions involve different processes and may include conscious deliberation. Others suggest that even if the unconscious initiates action, consciousness might still have a veto power, a kind of last-minute free won't. Still, the fundamental challenge remains. If our thoughts, emotions, desires, and choices arise from brain processes we do not control, what part of us is truly free? And yet, despite all of this, we go on living as if we have agency. We hold people responsible. We plan, regret, aspire. Our entire legal and moral system depends on the idea that we are, at least to some extent, the authors of our actions. So what do we do with this tension? We now face a deep contradiction. On one hand, the evidence from physics and neuroscience seems to erode our belief in free will. If everything is determined by physical laws, unconscious brain processes, and genetic programming, then how can we genuinely choose anything? On the other hand, our entire society is structured on the assumption that we do choose. We punish murderers and reward innovators. We teach, persuade, forgive, accuse. These actions only make sense if people are capable of doing otherwise. So even if free will is an illusion, it is a necessary one that civilization depends on. But is it possible to live ethically, meaningfully, and responsibly, even if we reject free will? That's a crucial question. Some thinkers, like philosopher Greg Caruso, argue for free will skepticism. He believes that while free will doesn't exist, we can still build a moral society without it, through what he calls public health justice. Instead of punishing people out of retribution, we treat harmful behavior like a public health problem, understanding its causes and working to reduce it through prevention, rehabilitation, and care. This is not a denial of responsibility, but a reframing of it. If someone commits a violent act, we don't say it's okay because it wasn't their fault. We say, let's understand why this happened so we can stop it from happening again. We shift from blame to understanding, from punishment to prevention. Others, like philosopher Dirk Pereboom, take a similar stance. He argues that even without free will, we can still have values, relationships, aspirations. We can still love and be loved. What we lose is not morality itself, but the moralistic tendency to shame and condemn. But not everyone agrees. Critics of this view argue that removing free will undermines human dignity. If we are nothing but biological machines, what happens to the notion of human rights? If no one is truly responsible, does anything really matter? Here, existentialism offers a powerful counterpoint. Existentialist thinkers accept that the universe may be absurd, meaningless, and indifferent. But rather than despair, they urge us to create meaning through our actions. Even if we are thrown into a world we didn't choose, we can still respond. We can still say yes to life. Friedrich Nietzsche, who profoundly influenced existentialism, rejected both religious determinism and mechanical causality. He saw human beings not as fixed essences, but as unfolding potentials. His concept of will to power wasn't about domination, but about creative self-overcoming, the drive to shape one's life, to affirm one's existence. Nietzsche didn't believe in free will in the traditional sense. He saw it as a theological leftover. But he did believe in freedom as self-mastery, the ability to become who you are, to affirm your life, to say yes to everything that has made you, even your suffering. Jean-Paul Sartre took this further. He insisted that even in a determined world, we are still condemned to be free. Why condemned? Because we have no excuse, not even determinism, for failing to take responsibility for our choices. We are always choosing, even when we pretend not to, and every choice defines us. But this freedom is not a cosmic license. It is not about escaping causality. It is about owning the response to our situation. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, put it this way: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This is a different kind of freedom, not freedom from causality, but freedom within it. Not the power to do anything, but the power to mean something. And this is where we must return to neuroscience. Yes, brain scans can predict some decisions before we are conscious of them, but neuroscience also shows us the brain's plasticity, its ability to change, adapt, rewire. Mindfulness, therapy, education, relationships, and effort can reshape the brain. This means that while we may not be the originators of our impulses, we can still influence the conditions under which our brains operate. In other words, we are not entirely free, but neither are we entirely fixed. The truth may lie in complexity. The human mind is not a simple machine. It is an emergent system where layers of biology, culture, memory, language, and attention interact in dynamic ways. Consciousness itself may be less a ruler and more a regulator, coordinating competing impulses, weighing long-term goals, and suppressing destructive tendencies. So perhaps we can think of freedom not as a binary, either we have it or we don't, but as a spectrum, a matter of degrees, a capacity that can grow or shrink depending on the structure of the brain, the conditions of the environment, and the habits of attention. This leads us to a humbler but more grounded understanding of agency. You didn't choose your genetics, your childhood, your culture, your first language, your early trauma, but you can influence how you respond to them. You can develop self-awareness. You can seek help. You can cultivate new habits. You can reflect, regret, learn, and try again. Even if the origin of those efforts is not ultimately free, they still matter. They still change the world, and they change you. So, does free will exist? If by free will we mean an uncaused chooser floating above the physical world, then no, that kind of freedom is a fantasy, one that neuroscience, physics, and psychology have largely dismantled. But if by freedom we mean the ability to reflect, to grow, to participate in shaping our lives within the constraints of reality, then yes, something like freedom survives. Not the freedom of gods, but the freedom of human beings, limited, fallible, but not powerless. We are not the authors of our origin, but we may be co-authors of our becoming. And that may be enough.